Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give you just a quick hello and then turn it over to Amara for introductions. But I'm just going to tell you that you're really in for a treat today. Hellen, and I'm just going to be honest, has been one of my favorite artists in a long time, and she's such a joy to hear talk. So I'm glad you're getting this opportunity. If you don't know me already, my name is Shawnee Turner. I'm the Interpretive Learning Director here at the Contemporary Arts Center. And we're so grateful to have you here listening today. But I also just want to thank especially the women for their support for today's event. And honestly, for the last 3 years, the Women has sponsored exhibits and other programming at the CAC that has focused on art and art by women. And more than 75,000 attendees have experienced this work because of their commitment to work by artists identifying as women. So thank you so much for that devotion. And I want to thank you all just for all of the support that you give to the Contemporary Art Center. Amara and I are always working on gallery programming, and we'll be working on more donor programming over the next coming year. So if there's anything that you would like to see, please reach out to Jay and let him know what types of experiences you would like to take part in. We'd love to hear your opinion. So with that, thanks again, and I'm going to turn it over to Amara.
Thank you, Shawnee, for that introduction. Hello, all, and thank you for joining today. On behalf of the CAC, again, I'm just thrilled to welcome Hellen, an amazing artist and thinker who I've had the real privilege to work with over the past year and develop this incredible solo project at the CAC, which is on view till September 19th. And so I'll start by just giving a brief introduction and bio for Hellen, and then I'll pass things over to her. So Hellen Ascoli was born in Guatemala City in 1984. She received her BFA from Southern Methodist University in Dallas and her MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago. Her multidisciplinary approach to art making derives from an engagement with weaving, movement, listening, and writing, which she applies to an exploration of the political relationship between body, object, and environment. She works with sound, video, installation, textile to generate ideas and experiences that are rooted in place. For her solo exhibition at the CAC, she created a new body of work that investigates translation and weaving as entry points for destabilizing Western-centric modes of being and communicating. The work also demonstrates her interest in reflecting on personal and collective experiences of trauma, and also kind of how everyday actions and ordinary experiences can be potential opportunities for change and transformation. Reflecting her collaborative process, we were also fortunate to work with many of her friends, artists, and writers and designers and musicians as well, whose works are kind of interwoven within the exhibition. So her work has also been included in numerous group exhibitions at institutions, including Art País Biennial in Guatemala City, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, and the ICA at VCU. Currently, she lives and works in Baltimore. So I want to thank you again for attending, and please join me in welcoming Hellen Ascoli.
Thank you so much, Amara. And that was a wonderful introduction. Your words are always such a great way to capture my work. And first off, I wanted to thank Shawnee Turner for this wonderful prompt and for organizing this talk and proposing that I talk about storytelling in my work and using someone else's interpretation of my work is always an exciting opportunity to revise and reframe the stories that I tell myself about what I do. So thank you for that prompt. So today's talk is on storytelling, and because of that, I wanted to start with a story. In 2014, I started my job as Director of Education at Museo Ixchel del Traje Indígena in Guatemala City. My first year there, I witnessed an impactful situation. A social worker approached the head curator, Violeta Gutierrez, for help in identifying the town of origin of an orphaned girl using her garments. The girl's situation was particular as she was nonverbal or had lost use of language during the bus accident where she lost her parents. The social worker was pretty concerned because once the girl was to turn 18, she would kind of be left to her own device in the city. And so was really pressed in finding any connection that may have existed before this bus accident where she had lost her parents. Violeta and the social worker came up with the idea to look at the girl's garments at the time of the accident for help in identifying the town of origin of the girl. But the clothing that she had was not sufficient evidence to determine exactly where she was from. So Violeta took out some pieces from the collection, hoping that the girl would recognize one design over another, giving clues to where she may be from. This too did not provide enough evidence. So again, the girl, another idea was devised, and the girl was asked to demonstrate without the use of a mirror how she dressed. She picked up one corte over others that were set out for her. A corte is a wraparound skirt that is wrapped around the bottom part of the body and tied in a specific way. So with extended arms, she tugged firmly from one side to another, wrapping it to the left and tucking it on one particular side. It was this gesture of the way that she tugged at the corte and the direction that she wrapped that revealed the place nearby Nevaj, where she was from. So for me, this story captures precisely what I think about when I think of storytelling. It talks about how we hit the boundary of language, and it demonstrates the importance of materiality and embodied knowledge. It points to a necessity of translation. And I'm quite sorry because as I was saying that, this video, which now I am going to fast forward a little bit so you get the idea of what's going on, should have been playing. So this piece is from 2014, titled Encounter, where I wrapped my body in a knit cocoon and rolled on top of the highest mountain in Guatemala. It was a way to feel earth pressed up against my body and to locate myself in space. So this piece was done about a year before the story that I just told you. But I kind of intuited that throughout textiles and the connection of weaving the body and the landscape, stories would start to emerge, and that these were the stories that I wanted to tell. Later that year, I started weaving again on the Backstrap Loom. So to understand a little bit about the Backstrap Loom, I just want to say that it is a connection between an architecture, the tension of the material or the tool, and a body. So as you can see here, the warp is in tension with my body. And this is a photograph of me in my studio. This tool is thousands of years old and has been used by Mayan people for thousands of years, pre-colonial. And if we were to judge it in terms of efficiency or in terms of what today we call efficiency, there really shouldn't be a reason for it to exist. It's not a very efficient tool. It doesn't produce much fabric during one weave. It's basically these panels that then get stitched together to form a garment. It's extremely laborious, and its production isn't vast. So if we look at that and then think, why does it still exist today? Because it's continued to be used in Guatemala, then we have to evaluate it in different terms. And so that's what makes me think of storytelling and the connection of storytelling to my work. And I think it still exists today because as a storytelling tool, it is extremely important. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's domestic, that it's mostly used by women in the domestic space, and that it connects weaving to text and kind of holds all of these stories of the Guatemalan and Mayan experience. So I wanted to show you this diagram of the backstrap loom, because the backstrap loom actually, the parts of it named in Cachiquel tell you or direct you as to what to do with it. So in this way, I view the backstrap loom not just as a tool that I use, but as an active collaborator in my practice. So you can start by seeing at the top, it has a face and a front, it has a head, it has a rukush, which is its heart, and it pounds. That's the stick labeled number 2 that kind of like lifts up the threads and pushes the shed open and closed. And it has a stomach or an opening, a mouth, which is where you pass the weft through. And because of that, you feed it as you work it. So it's not just something that is inanimate, but rather it's alive as you're working with it. And the tendency is to not cut it because it kind of captures the energy of a moment as you work on it. Here's a photo taken by Marilyn Anderson of how the loom relates to the body, which I quite love, because you can kind of see that direct relationship between the weaver and the loom. It captures the stories of many generations. And I wanted to show this photograph of 3 generations of women from Nevaj, which is actually the town where the orphan girl was from, or the nearby areas of Nevaj. And you can see how over time it has diminished a bit in practice. And you can see that by looking at the symbols, the texture within the 3 women. So even though the 3 women are wearing the traditional garment from Nevaj, you can see the mother, or the woman on the right, has the eldest textile, most patterned, and going to the youngest girl has the most modern because it has less amount of design. These symbols capture a lot of the storytelling within Mayan communities, but I have to be quite careful in saying that I'm not Mayan, and I'll go into that in a moment as to the limitations that I place on or set kind of some of the boundaries that I don't cross, because although I am a Guatemalan woman, I am not Mayan. So the storytelling embedded in these symbols is something that I respect so much that I think don't belong to me, so I stay away from them. So I'll talk about kind of a different form of storytelling beyond these symbols. I wanted to share this quote that is also written in the exhibition in one of the text pieces. And it comes from a text by Donna Haraway, Staying with the Trouble. And she tells the British social anthropologist Marilyn Strathern, who wrote The Gender of the Gift based on her ethnographic work in the Highland Papua New Guinea, taught me that it matters what ideas we use to think other ideas with. It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. What looms weave our stories matters. And this is kind of the shift that I wanted to give in today's talk is perhaps in storytelling or in thinking about this exhibition in storytelling, it's that the storyteller is not me, but the backstrap loom. And I'm a translator of such stories. This is a text that I wrote that's also in one of the cédulas for the pieces, and I had written it for a different show, but it says, I no longer wish to create, I think. I wish to translate, to let my body be the place where tension meets the ground, to let my fingers gently and patiently find a way for each thread. So I just wanted to again say that before we move on, I'm not a Mayan weaver, although I am a Guatemalan weaver. And I understand that for translation, this limits my ability to fully translate the stories of the backstrap loom. Not all of them are mine, but some are certainly shared. Because of this, I do not use the symbols in my weaving, as my lived experiences has not yet gotten me there. They are, though, a wealth of knowledge and storytelling. And just to show that, because I always think it's important to give space as to where the tradition of backstrap weaving comes from, for me, here is a map of all of the huipiles in Guatemala. And this was taken at Museo Ixchel when I was given a guided tour. You can see me up there. And I'm kind of pointing out the different symbols that demonstrate how you can tell how one person is from one community as different from another. However, this identification is also something that is a very potentially dangerous and puts people in a vulnerable position. Here is a photo by Jean-Marie Simon showing how military used this very symbol recognition to determine who to target during the civil war, the armed conflict, civil war, and then genocide. So this is not a position that I can speak from, which is why I'm quite careful of giving it space, but not speaking from this particular place. I do, however, want to start then with words in Cachiquel from my friend and collaborator, Negma Coy, and she is a Cachiquel weaver and poet. And when her and I text back and forward, she often asks me, how is your heart? Which that's the translation from Cachiquel, as opposed to asking, how are you? And this kind of started to pose the question of where is the heart located? How is the heart of the backstrap loom a time teller, our storyteller, a beat across bodies, materials, and times? So this is in the gallery on the 5th floor, where you can see Negma's work on the left and my work on the right. And she wove in her piece, in glyphs, the title for a poem called Cachiquel Heart. And the title of the weave is called Heritage. So how does the loom tell a story of resistance? And I translated Negma's poem, which is an audio also to be found in the space. In the space, it's in Cachiquel. Here you can find it in Cachiquel, in Spanish, and in English. So, Sound of Hearts. Grandmother Ixchel, grandmother teacher, guardian of weaving, what is the sound of your heart today? Come, lives in Kumatsin, sacred dancing fire, grandmother of eclipsed moon, owl singer of time, fertility of Mother Earth, zigzagging rivers and nocturnal hiding places, stars that illuminate new paths, delirious humming of drowned truths, sacred mountains, messengers of omens, skins that melt with my nawal, connections of energies in different dimensions, happiness and gazes of tender generations. Come, nest in my being, vibrate, palpitate in my hands. Here I receive the voice of every heart. Boom, 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 boom. Listen to my thunderous Cachiquel heart. Boom, 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 boom. Grandmother Ixchel, my hands thread moments, my hands wind wisdom, my hands warp the counting of time. My hands weave the story. They weave the strength of our grandmothers and grandfathers. They weave the fight of our mothers and fathers. They weave truth. They weave resistance. They weave community. They weave spiral knowledge. My weave and I, one beat, one heart that speaks, that sings, that tells, that whistles, that braids, that plants, that reveals life in cloth. What is the sound of your heart today? How does the loom tell the story of protest? How does the loom tell the story of fire? And this piece from Museo Ixchel was always in mind as well. I've kind of gathered some stories and textiles that I carry around and reference or try to aim at, although they're not directly shown in my work. So this piece always fascinated me because it's from Magdalena Milpas Altas and it's embroidered, not woven. But it kind of breaks away from the traditional motif order of the of Magdalena Milpas Altas, although it does on all the other ones have these little buttonhole stitches, never as like explosive and all over and gestural as this piece. So for years, I wondered what would have caused this artist to imagine such a scene, a deviation from the normal motifs. I think that she knew what would happen. It was an act of premonition, the stories of Guatemalan protest and femicide. So in 2017, the girls from Asuncion, which was an orphanage in Guatemala City, had escaped the orphanage as an act of protest. Many of them were being raped by the guards. So some of these stories will be difficult to tell, so if I stumble through them. And they were caught that night and brought back. And as punishment, they were all placed inside a room and locked. The girls, who were rightfully and clearly enraged, in an act of protest, lit one of the mattresses inside the bedroom on fire. And as I just said, the doors were locked and nobody opened the doors. So 41 girls were calcinated that day. And to this day have not, no justice has really been served. So I imagine that the woman who embroidered the sute that I showed you before had this sense of fires kind of going all over the place and happening, kind of exploding into lights, or sometimes I see the motif as stars or bullet holes. And so it is a way to recreate the textile. Instead of remaking it in fiber, I set out with these flower motifs and flowers bundled in mattress fabric, and set them on fire on the ice here in, currently I'm in Madison just for my last day, so out on the ice during winter. Another one of my collaborators captured some of these ideas of fire and ice and water and explosions in the volcano. So what does it mean that our landscape is kind of constantly trying to push us out? And how do we reconcile that? So these are some of the paintings that he made that were placed in different parts of the exhibition in conversation with my work. This piece shows a bundle of abandoned mattresses, photos of abandoned mattresses that I took for many years in Madison. A painting by Jorge de Leon, several of the burnt bowls that I used out in the lake, and an ironing board. And the title of it, it takes effort to burn a body, kind of reflecting on just this experience of being out there and trying to set something on fire and struggling against it. So burning 41 girls at the hands of the state wasn't a passive act. It didn't just happen. All of the conditions kind of aligned. And I think this is what I mean in storytelling of when we hit the boundary of language. You see me struggling with it because there are no words for this. And so to try to kind of place myself in a state of reflection towards this and remember the girls, this piece was born. So this is that corner of the exhibition. You can see down the TVs are inset within a mattress frame, Jorge's paintings, and a textile that says, memory is the insistence of remembering. So how does the loom hold my story of love and loss, of memory and insistence? In 2016, my brother was murdered in Guatemala City. And this piece, titled What Remains, was an attempt also to have weaving kind of hold that pain and hold the last gestures that we could have for my brother Hans, which was laying flowers for him every weekend. So I went to a flower market and kind of measured what hugging him could be and bundled it up in this fabric. And again, the title of the piece is What Remains. Since then, since his death, which is, we're getting to 5 years now, my parents visit his gravesite almost every weekend, and then text us flowers, photos of the flowers, which I then have saved and printed out. And they also are in the exhibition as kind of this, it's not of not letting go, but it's of making sure that you remember. And above it, again, Jorge's paintings of protest and fire in Guatemala City. And this was this past Sunday where my dad sent flowers. As we're visiting, they're always in our heart. I think a lot about how I carry Hans's memory alongside, and it's not necessarily a story, but it's how I carry his life alongside the places where I am. So this piece, which gives title to the exhibition, says, "In the sky, en cielo, entierro," which means burial or in earth, destierro, which means being pushed out of earth, or diaspora, migration, leaving a country. Sin tierra, without land. Cien tierras, 100 lands. And I think of this as a way to kind of transform the narrative, or in weaving, we say you weave world. It's never about weaving the same motif again, but it's about how every time you reweave a weave, you are telling anew, you're building a new life, something new is happening. Oops. And then this title, or this piece, proposes another story, or perhaps a future story, and it's titled "What We Shaped Soft Gods Here." And not just thinking about stories of past, but how we form a collective imaginary of stories. So what if the backstrap loom or weaving was held in time in a particular way, or marked time in a way that the same way that we regard stone and metal and ceramics, which are hard materials? What if we gave soft shapes or soft materials that place to hold something in our collective imaginary? So again, the future telling of stories. And the reference comes from Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, and it's a collaboration with my husband, Carl Williamson, who designed and then mechanized these weavings. And Octavia Butler proposes this idea of God shaping as kind of a preparedness to go out into the world. And so at one point in the Parable of the Sower, the main character, Lauren, is preparing for leaving the small neighborhood or small kind of enclosed space that she was, as fires start to gather around her. And she's to pack a bag. And in this kind of pre-leaving, she runs away and forgets the bag inside her house. And she says, she calls that poor God shaping because there is kind of a lack of preparedness on her behalf. And she kind of says that to be a better God shaper, she should leave the bag near the door. And I think about this as the way that we prepare also to tell stories for the future, and which ones we decide to kind of insist on, which memories we carry as we move into a new territory, not without regarding the loss of life, but how do you carry that into something new? So I managed to get a little bit nervous and speak quickly instead of going slower. So I am a bit ahead of time. So I don't know, maybe we can open up for some questions, or perhaps I can go back and explain a piece and tie it in a little bit better in my presentation. Oh, you're muted, Amara.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Helen. It was really incredible to hear you kind of talk through your process and connect the theme of storytelling to some of the works in the show and the development of the exhibition. I noticed just a few questions have come in, and we have one from Liz Lloyd, who asks, how has your own healing through stages of grief, losing your brother and thinking of these 41 girls, influenced your work? And I'm just going to read another one as well, and you can kind of pick and choose what you answer. Asking, the same person asking, why did you choose to weave versus other types of media? And what significance does that hold for you?
Let me start off with the question of why did I choose to weave instead of other type of media? And I just want to kind of highlight this quote again, and maybe I went through it a little too quick. I think the way that we choose to tell stories matters, right? So if I would have chosen to tell these very stories through, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a hard material through bronze, that would have kind of kept it in a particular place, or held with it a heaviness. I think that by choosing weaving, and this particular type of weaving, I'm kind of embedding myself within the history of Guatemala as a country. I am also locating myself within a history of women who use weaving as a way to process something through their own physical, through their own embodiment. So when I sit there and think of Hans, which is not always, sometimes there was weaves that I sit and Hans comes up. My brother's name was Hans. And I kind of know that weaving is meant to be for him. And maybe it takes me to memory, and it's a way of reliving it without like staying stuck in it. It's a way to kind of move it through your body. And then when you finish it, you can kind of return to the same pattern, but it doesn't mean you're returning to the same place. And so I think that in that way, the Backstrap Loom really does kind of bring together both the place that I come from, that is so filled with grief, but also histories that are not of grieving, right? And kind of ties it in, it kind of brings it all together in I'm trying not to use the word woven way, but that's what it's doing. So yeah, I think that's a way to process grief. And I think that many weavings in Guatemala hold that grief. So sometimes going out to the markets and seeing different patterns emerge, you can almost kind of sense, certainly by knowing the symbols and colors and choices of colors, you can tell, but which ones are made in grief, which ones are made in celebration, which ones are made in memory, and so on. I hope that answered your question.
I want to follow up. It's going to partially include Jay's question about working solo or collaboratively, but it's kind of a question and a comment and a story in a way. An experience I had doing a tour to a group of college students and their professor last week. And we started talking about your collaboration and the inclusion of your collaborators, specifically Nigma, and your insistence of making sure that people knew you were not, claiming to be Mayan, using Mayan symbols. But I was really impacted by your word interpreter as you were talking. And it made me just think about the conversation that I had with the professor, because he made the comment that you were in many ways interpreting and allowing Negma to come through in the work in a way that was accessible for people here in Cincinnati, where it wouldn't have been understood in a different way. And so you're allowing this this ability to be heard, even though you're not Mayan yourself, and giving honor to that tradition, which I think is really beautiful. But I also feel like it can be really just helpful for us to think of that in broader terms of allyship. Because I know sometimes, you know, we struggle with that. And I think you're doing a wonderful service of allyship to your Mayan friends, and that as a way of kind of telling stories in accessible ways. And I wonder, kind of taking off of Jay's question about working solo or collaboratively, if you feel like that's easier to do when you're working with collaborators.
Yeah, initially when I talked to Amara a year ago, over a year ago, she was asking a bit about this collaborative practice that I have as well. And we were thinking about what kind of show could happen. And I certainly believe that my work does not exist without collaboration. There's a word that I use that's about two different words that I use to describe my work: proprioception and affordances. And proprioception is the way that your body, through pressure, locates itself in space. So there's like a boundary, a pushing up against, a tugging at the articulations, kind of what I'm doing in the rolling of feeling yourself up against space. And then affordances is how one material or object or space relates specifically to another body or material, again, in relationship. And then the third word that I use to describe my work is translation. So all three of these works kind of position me in relationship to another. And that can be material, that can be place, that can be tool. I think of myself as collaborating with the Backstrap Loom. I don't see it as something that I'm trying to impose myself on. And certainly it's that proprioception. I don't want to say that pushback, because it's not a pushing of sorts, but that kind of encounter of one boundary up against another that gives context to my work. So, or that gives meaning to my work. Without it, I don't think that I could create. And I do prefer to see myself as a translator than a creator of sorts. Yeah, so it's kind of, it's so embedded within that I don't know if you take it out, I don't quite know where I would stand, to be honest.
Just hearing you describe that encounter between places and individuals and that tension and also reminds me of, you know, some of our conversations over the past year and how all of this work was really made, you know, during quarantine, part of it during COVID, while you were based in Madison, and kind of the relationship between, you know, your home there and your home in Guatemala and these other kind of touch points. And so I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about, you know, how the Midwest and your being based in kind of impacted the development and also the social justice uprisings of the past year, and just the larger context that was kind of surrounding all of us as you were working on these works.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I kind of want to think about it and parse it out in part. I think a lot about the messages that I received during that time, or kind of these extensions or vibrations. So living in Madison kind of positioned me in a very safe space in terms of I could go out and walk during lockdown and quarantine, something that my friends in Guatemala weren't necessarily able to do. And some people in Madison weren't able to do. So I was very lucky in that regard. And then I'm thinking about like all of these messages or floods of messages and ways of communicating that we had to develop to maintain ourselves healthy. So when I say that Negma would text me and say, "How's your heart?" That, I mean, she would text me before and ask me how I'm doing, but I think it really kind of made stronger these text messages, and the check-ins within friendships were a lot more than just a kind of, "Hey, how are you?" or something like that. But it went quite deep and asked this question of, "How is your heart? How are you kind of holding up?" And then during this time, here in the United States, of course, there were Black Lives Matter protests, and I was going out to the Capitol here in Madison, and the motif of fire kind of started emerging as I saw a trash can burn, and just being very conscious of how my body was there to kind of form a boundary between police and other bodies. And I thought a lot about how Madison has a very different way of protesting than Guatemala City. In Guatemala City, there's a plaza in the center that everyone goes and walks to and can stand in front of the National Palace and beat a drum. And some of the sounds of the exhibition come from that, and kind of claim to this building or to this state. Versus in Madison, the Capitol is at the center and there is a square around it. And so you're caught in this loop of kind of like being chased around and being pushed into different sides. So it felt very strange to not have a physical place to go yell at and be angry at. So a lot of this, these experiences, and I'm kind of rambling, or it seems maybe I'm rambling, but I'm kind of setting points in moments of the year that really informed the exhibition, from protest sounds and the beating heart, and how even if those are physically different locations, how there was a similar kind of beat of going downtown to the Capitol and claiming space, of resisting, of yelling at something, to continue manifesting, we're here. And I think that in a way that echoes the heart of the Backstrap Loom. So again, kind of going back to this point of why the Backstrap Loom is because it does have a beating heart, and it does kind of insist we're here. And Negma's poem does such a beautiful job of saying that, of like saying, through these generations, through these drowned truths, we're here. And the Kumatsin, for example, is a motif of a mountain or a serpent that goes up and down through this like pulse. And in her sound piece, it also sounds that way, right? With the boom, boom, we're here. So I don't know if I've just kind of worked myself into a spiral, as I tend to do, or if that kind of illustrates, at least through sensation, some of the things that were going on in this exhibition making.
If you don't mind, I'd love to make a comment. You brought up fire. And, you know, when I think about fire, there's so much symbolism wrapped up in fire, you know, and I think the automatic reaction is for us to think about destruction. But, you know, throughout time and so many different cultures, fire is a symbol of creation as well as destruction, you know, creation coming through destruction. And I wonder, I kind of want to touch on a question Liz brought up, or a request, but also maybe to get you to talk about, you know, the use of fire, not just as a reference to the murder of those 41 girls, but also possibly as a a spiritual cleansing or a renewal in that work. And Liz was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling the story again briefly, because she was kind of lost in the horror of it and didn't quite catch all of the.
Yeah, it's horrific story to tell. It's difficult. I find myself losing words to say it, and I think that's what I mean when you hit the boundary of language, because how does a state calcinate 41 girls locked in a room? And what happened was it's not an orphanage, it's kind of like a halfway house that exists in Guatemala City. So a lot of the girls that are there maybe are having some sort of trouble with their family or neighborhood that they live in. A lot of them are from outside of the city. Maybe they were taken away from their parents and they're placed under the care of the state. And during this time, the girls, they're being taken care of by male guards, and several of them were being raped by the guards. Many of the bodies that were found were also found to be pregnant. So in this rebellious and courageous act, they escaped. And there is one last video of them on YouTube where they're all kind of sitting around up against a wall, and they've grabbed them and they're singing like pop songs from the 80s and 90s, and like being teenage girls who are fed up with the situation and want out. And they get locked into a room, and the room has just mattresses, and that's what they set on fire. And of course, mattress fiber is mostly plastic and so on, and catches very fast. And the room was locked, and it wasn't opened, and so they burned. And it was also on International Women's Day. So when this happened, I remember being at the plaza when a lot of women together gathering, when we all started seeing on social media this event that had occurred. Many women in kind of zone 1 where I live in Guatemala City then kind of formed a coalition of helping families identify bodies and so on. And so it is quite horrific. And I didn't, we talked about this with Amara at some point, that I didn't, similar to symbols, it's not something that I suffered. My body was not burnt. My body was not under attack during genocide. My body was not vulnerable during the protests last year here in the United States, and so how do you form a moment of reflection or give fire in you signification and go out and put yourself in a situation to think about it? And so I had collected photos of the mattresses, abandoned mattresses here in Madison, for years, thinking of them as these weapons just waiting to set on fire that people just kind of leave for the trash to be taken. And I realized that I didn't want to just recreate that beautiful star piece, but rather, what if that was a premonition of the embroiderer, of the weaver, or it's something that she had seen on a different scale, something that she had already lived, that violence. And at the same time, you look at that piece, and it's incredibly stunning and beautiful, and it kind of opens up to maybe fires, maybe flowers, maybe stars, maybe bullet holes, so kind of reminding me of my brother's chest, and these different ways of thinking about how weavings capture that space of wordlessness, or these motifs capture that. Certainly renewal. I think of fire as destruction and renewal, right? And I think you're very straight on, Shani.
you. Just unmuting. I feel like you have a really incredible ability, Hellen, to connect kind of form and materiality with concept, and the way that you choose, the form that a work ends up becoming is always so thought through and intentional, and it's really incredible to kind of hear more about that process and that thought process. I think we just have time for one more question, and I'm just going to read it from the chat. It's from Jay, and he mentions, you are so respectful in thinking about appropriation versus appreciation. Excuse me. How do other creators properly incorporate other traditions into their creative work and stories? And what practices inspire you or would you recommend in this regard?
Thank you. I think it's a question I think that a lot of us have today. It took me a while to get back into the Backstrap Loom because I didn't want to appropriate weaving either. And I think making mistakes is also totally valid. And there's no kind of right or wrong answer. I really can't be one to speak, certainly from a place of authority. And I also try to be very careful with the word authentic, because your approach, no one can tell you whose approach to something is authentic. So extending also the benefit of the doubt of wanting to come close to a subject through authenticity, and that we want as humans to feel connection, even though we also sometimes badly make mistakes. I think one of the things I try to do is the person who has the story should be the person that tells it. So there are stories that are mine to tell and that manifest through the Backstrap Loom. And as I'm working, which stories are yours. And also those can be fictitious stories. They can be imagined stories. They can be your daydreamings or your want for a different world, right? Like Octavia Butler. It's why I got so excited in kind of taking on her words of God shaping it, because I would read that and I would kind of want to think of God shaping and what a different world could be without jumping over the hardships, right? So yeah, letting people who have the story tell the story, which is why collaboration matters, because you're not going to be able to encompass the whole of the stories, right? So having Negma's voice there is very important, as is having Jorge's and having Carl's there, who all come from very different backgrounds. So yeah, I would say also it helps. I think that the Backstrap Loom certainly helps me embody where I'm from. Like having something physically go through you is a very strong, important part of my work, which is why, again, I choose the Backstrap Loom, why it as a storyteller matters to me, because I am kind of working through it instead of like just reading about it or narrating it or telling it from a different point of view, but like quite physically I'm attached to it. So that kind of gives, allows others to give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm physically placing myself in a situation with my whole body.
That was really amazing. I was actually telling myself, messaging Amara about how wonderful this was to listen to today. So it was just a really wonderful gift for you to join us today, Hellen. And I appreciate so much your time sharing your experience and your thoughts with us today. And thank you, Amara, for bringing us Hellen. It's been great to experience your exhibition so far. And if Hellen is any marker of what we have to come, I'm anxiously awaiting it. So thank you, Amara.
Thank you.
Again, to the women and all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.